Alright, what's going on everyone? My name is Logan with West Desert Wheeler. My first video I ever posted on my YouTube channel was an Axial Capra that I had converted to a rear steer rig. At the time, the four-wheel steer Capra sitting right here was not out yet, so I had to custom make mine. It was a ton of fun and I've enjoyed the Axial Capra platform for the few years that it's been out. It's one of my favorite cars to drive and build. In today's video, we're going to cover my favorite modifications to do to the Axial Capra. And this is actually my first four-wheel steer Capra I've ever had that is a factory four-wheel steer Capra. So this should be a fun one. We're going to get into why I like to change the things that I do, and then we're going to go and run it in a separate video. So today's going to be the build video, and then we're going to follow that up with our running footage and see what kind of difference we see on this truck out on the rocks. I do have a video of a bone stock four-wheel steer Capra when it first came out, but that was not my car, and so today we're building my own car with my favorite modifications on it. Now, the few things you might notice on this car is that these panels never came with the black cage. So I actually was given a red cage with brand new panels on it from my buddy Connor. Thank you very much. And I swapped the panels onto this car just because I like the black and red combo on this black cage. And then also I am missing my interior out of here as I had used it for a custom buggy build. So those are the few little things different from a stock car, but outside that, it's still got the factory electronics, it's got the factory servos, wheels, tires, foams, all of that. And I've never even powered it up, and I'm not going to either. We're gonna swap out a bunch of stuff and get this thing ready to hit the hard lines. Let's see what our first modification is gonna be. All right, so one of the most important changes you can make to your Axial Capra is to put traction down. Unfortunately, as good as these Nitto tires look from Axial, they are very, very stiff. They don't conform much for the weight of the vehicle, and the compound isn't quite optimized compared to some other compounds available out there from aftermarket offerings. One of my personal favorites that I like to go with are the Proline Krawlers. Now, these are my own tires that I have modified from Proline. So I will take a tire and cut up the sidewall across the tread and down the other side. And then I take a piece from a donor tire, insert that inside the opening, and then glue the two seams back together. This is what is called a cut and shut. I sell these on my website, westdesertwheeler.com, and I think for the wheelbase of this car, as well as the width, just the overall look on these 5.25 inch tall tires, these look fantastic. Now when I cut and shut them, it creates a 2.2 bead. So we're gonna need some different wheels as well. That's where Vision Wheels stepped up and donated a couple of their wheels for the project. So thank you very much to Vision Wheel. These are absolutely beautiful wheels. So taking a look at our Vision wheel here, this is a 2.2 wheel. All the hardware is on the beadlock ring. So you can see on the inside there is tons of clearance for our portals to go up inside, as well as a very positive offset. So these are not going to make our track width any wider. In fact, this may make this car narrower overall, but you can of course choose the different hubs that you want to use to narrow or widen the track width with these wheels. All right, so we've got our wheels, we've got our tires. We need the last component for the RC side of things. We need what is going inside the tire to support the car, and that has been provided by our friends over at SL3D RC. These are Squid'n'serts, and these are made specifically for my cut and shut tires. Because these are a 3D printed insert, these are made specific to each tire size. So if you're looking for 1.9 sizes, he has a chart online that will give you a guide over which sizes fit which tires. These are made specifically for my cut and shuts. There are a couple options on there, as I offer Trepadors and Crawlers. The Trepadors are a taller tire, so they require a larger insert. The Crawler, this is the Crawler insert right here. The second option you will see is what width wheel you're going to be using. These Vision wheels are fairly narrow, so I chose the narrow wheel option on SL3D's site. So these are going to fit in there. They're going to fight side hilling immensely well. They're nice and conformative up top, as well as they are not foam, so they don't break down if you get them into water. So these are waterproof inserts as well. Just a side note real quick, we are absolutely going to vent all of our tires. I vent all my tires on all my RCs. So one final note on the wheels is that we used Vanquish 350 hubs. On the front, I have brass hubs. On the rear, they are the SLW aluminum hubs. So just running brass on the front to give it a little more forward weight bias. And truthfully, all they had in stock for the 350s was one pair of black and one pair of brass down at Sky RC. So that's why I went the way I did. Now, this is where we can talk about the Capra platform in general. You're gonna see a couple parts failures on these cars that is very, very common. So I would say the number one most common failure you're gonna see is actually your servos, your steering servos. Depending on how you treat them, they can last a little bit longer or go out really quickly. The way I drive, with the way I go running into cracks, and I'm very aggressive with, you know, my steering inputs and really binding the car up, I kill these servos pretty quickly. So we're going to swap out our servos. And because I like to go overkill, I've got two Reefs 1100 Smart servos. So we're gonna be running 1100s front and rear on this car. Going to create over 1,000 ounce-inches of torque for steering on the front and on the back. So super awesome. They are also fully programmable with the Reefs program card, meaning you can actually turn them up, change the throw, and also the speed, and a few other cool features on there as well if you get the Reefs program card. I've never actually done that. I'm just mean to them right out of the box, and they are really awesome for what they are. I really like the Reefs products. So that's going to happen, as well as when we change this out, the factory Spectrum servos are a 23-tooth spline, and then the Reefs are a 25-tooth spline. 25 is more common. Spectrum's kind of one of the last companies out there to be running 23. So over at Vanquish, they have these pink breast cancer awareness servo horns. These are limited edition, and I was able to grab a pair. So we're gonna run the BCA horns on our Capra here. So gonna add a little flash of pink down there, but you know, for breast cancer awareness, well worth it. The reason I haven't swapped out the front tires on this guy is because we also are going to change out our knuckle on the portal in the front. And not just the knuckle, we're going to change this out to a brass knuckle with a brass portal cover, and internally we're going to change that out with some Trio Overdrive gears. So Overdrive is a feature that makes your front tires spin faster than the back tires. As you push into a vertical wall, it will help the front end climb faster, and also as you turn, it will help pull the nose of the car around faster as well. These ones are from Trio, and I believe the gearing ratio that I got here looks like 14-21 tooth. I believe these are supposed to be around the 30% range if I remember what I bought. So this should be an awesome upgrade, as well as these are a machined steel, whereas the original portal gears are a sintered metal. So it's a weaker metal in the portal gears. Once you get a strong enough motor in these and you really bind it up, it's possible to break a portal gear. I don't do it that often, but I also run quite a few machined gears in my other rigs. So for now, we're gonna start out with just the front replacement. You can get stock ratio replacements for the rear if you want to strengthen your portal gears, and I would say that's a great way to go, but it's not necessarily something I do right off the gate. I usually wait till I break one, and then I'll replace it with some upgrades. So let's go ahead and dig into the front end of this car. We're gonna pull the knuckles off, and then we're gonna put Overdrive inside of them with our new brass knuckles. Let's talk about which brass knuckles we got. I really like the finish on the SSD knuckles. These are a kind of a shiny black chrome finish on there. And then here are our portal covers. This is not an absurd amount of weight for a Capra. There are companies that make very heavyweight knuckles for the Capra, and I don't necessarily need to go overkill on it, just some good amount of forward weight on this car. That will definitely be noticeable out on the trail to have that little bit more forward weight. I've definitely added more than that and had experienced good results, but this has also delivered good results as well. So we're gonna start with that on this project. I like the SSD product, it's good fit and finish. It's definitely something I can back in saying I definitely suggest picking up a pair. All right guys, here's our factory knuckle. I removed all the hardware, so we're going to pull this portal cover off. The lower portal gear is going to be captured by your hex on the outside, so you're gonna have to remove the hex, and there's a little silver washer in there, and then the gear will be able to pull the shaft with it out the backside of this portal box. So let's go ahead and do that. It's a 1.5 millimeter driver. I like the threaded pin design on the Capras. I have seen those threaded pins get bent, and it can be very difficult to remove, and same with this silver washer. If you run your car enough, it can get trapped where the cross drill hole is for that pin to go through, And so sometimes that can be a bit of a pain to get apart. But there you go. Now that we've pulled that out of the portal cover, we actually had a bearing fall out of there. Now we're going to push the shaft towards the back of the portal. It's got that cross pin out the rear. Remove our stock gear, and then let's just swap out the pin that Treel provides. So this guy, we're going to slide the flat face towards the outside of the portal box, and then take the pin that Treel provides. They give you like an 8-pack, so got a couple spares. I've only seen one pin break, and that was from my buddy Luke at Scumbag RC on Instagram. So there we go. The pin fits awesome, nice, good, tight fitment. Now we're ready to put this back through our new portal cover. So I'm going to swap all the bearings from my stock portal boxes into the new portal boxes. If your car has some miles on it, definitely grab the bearing, give it a spin to see if it's still good. There we go, nice and flush. And I also need to remove this upper portal bearing before I get carried away. And there we go, she snapped right down into place. So now we've got our lower gear in place, we've got our upper gear, we can set that in the portal box, and then I'm gonna put a coating of grease on the lower gear before we insert it. You'll notice I'm not necessarily filling the portal box with this stuff, but that's just enough grease you need to get on between the gears. And the grease itself can actually hold that gear in place, and then we can set the portal box down over it. Then you need to get your stub shaft lined up with the bearing in the portal box. Everything slides into place, and now that gear is captured in there. Now we just need to put hardware in the front side of the portal box. And that's as easy as it is to swap out your portal boxes, put some overdrive in the front as well as some weight. This is going to be an awesome combo for the front of this car. Well, here we are. We got our front knuckles installed along with our overdrive gears, making good progress. Got those beautiful wheels and tires on there. Again, Vision RC wheels. Those things look awesome on there. So let's talk about the next step that this car needs. Now, I introduced our servos a minute ago and mentioned how that's a common failure point. I talked to a lot of people about Capra upgrades as well as their projects, and I've gotten a lot of messages where people will tell me, hey man, I was out crawling and my motor burned up. Unfortunately, these cars don't have the right gear reduction from the box. So you've got the stock Capra transmission that feeds into portal gears. There's not enough gear reduction in that transmission compared to standard crawlers, like the SCX-10-3, Vanquish VRD, Axial SCX-10 Pro, things like that. The Capra is geared higher, so it will go faster with the same speed motor, if that makes sense, which means it's like you're trying to rock crawl in second gear. So it's hard on everything, and including that cheap brushed motor, they just can't hang when you're trying to really finesse crawl or maybe hold it on a hill by holding the throttle that you're actually not supposed to do. That will shorten the life of the motor and kill it. So I'm going to install one of my absolute favorite upgrades in just about every crawler, and we're going to put a Hobbywing Fusion Pro in this guy. This is 2300 kV. What kV means is the amount of RPM you get per volt. So the higher the kV, the faster the motor spins, the lower, the slower it is. As opposite with turns in brushed motor. If you get more turns, they create more torque, but they're a slower motor. So turns are the opposite of kVs. Just some added information there. Now this is not exactly a direct drop-in. We're going to have to Dremel our skid plate to get this back corner of the motor to fit. I've done it before, but I'm going to show you guys how I do it, just so that the answer is in this video. So it's a really common motor that people put in these, or at least want to, and I want to show you guys how to do it. Hobbywing Fusion Pro, let's get this cage ripped off of the drivetrain. We're going to pull this out of the way, and then we're going to dig into how to install a Fusion Pro into your Capra. Now, removing the cage on a Capra is fairly straightforward, and it's very easy if you've got a driver that hooks into your drill, like this little 2mm driver here. Snap that into our drill here. And essentially what you're going to do is remove the 4 shock screws, so one on each corner, and then there are skid plate screws and it's not the lower ones. The lower holes require a 1.5 millimeter driver. Those hold your links in place, the lower links. The upper screws, where this seam is from the cage to the skid plate, you're gonna remove the screws just above that seam. So that's where you're trying to work on the car. And so you just pull out 2 on this side, 2 on the other side. Finally, the last thing you'll deal with is in the fuel cell is, well, I guess maybe not in this car. Traditionally, your receiver sits in the fuel cell. This has a combination 2-in-1 ESC and receiver. So all the wires are running to that, which is hooked to the cage. So you're gonna have wires stuck from your skid plate to the cage. We may remove that out of the cage right now anyway, because we're also going to remove that because this is a motor ESC and receiver combo. This guy has its own ESC built in. So when installing this, you will have to get a standalone receiver which talks to your controller. Now, if you want to keep your stock Spectrum remote, you can do that. You just have to buy a Spectrum receiver. I prefer the Flysky GT5 controller and the Flysky GT5 receiver. So that's the other thing, is you got to stay within brands and also know which receivers work with your controller. A quick Google search will answer all these questions for you. What we are going to do is remove all the wiring out of this cage here so that we can separate it from our drivetrain. Okay, so as we start to pull this cage off, which wires are we going to be dealing with here? So your rear servo, all the wires are going to be hooked to the receiver that control things. So looks like we got our rat's nest for our lights here. Let's just disconnect our servo wires from the receiver there. So now that wire is out. This wire runs along with the lights. It's also got a servo extension, so we can unplug that. We're gonna basically be rewiring this whole car, so no big deal. Don't have to worry about keeping track of which one's which. We can just pull our bullet connectors off the motor to the ESC. Okay, so at this point, we've got our ESC receiver combo still in the truck, and then we've got all our wires for our lights in the truck as well, and then we've got our leads for our motor. So the cage is completely separate from the drivetrain. Now we can work on getting the transmission out to put the new motor in. Now I know from experience there are 4 screws on the bottom of this transmission. However, one of them is shorter than the other 3. The side with the 3 screws, the forward screw, is the short guy. So it's noticeably shorter, so don't run too long of a screw into your transmission. The other 3, the 2 towards the rear and then the opposite side, are the same length. The short guy is on the front, just underneath the drive shaft side. So there's a good reference for you. Short one goes under the drive shaft. All right, so here is our transmission. If you're ever giving the car throttle and the motor is spinning but the wheels are not spinning, it's very likely that your slipper clutch has come loose. This is a little 7mm nut here, and basically you have to stop the drive shafts from moving somehow and tighten up that slipper clutch if your car won't move under a mild bind. You do want it to slip at a certain point. You know, there's different ways to tune that. That's up to you. I usually crank them down just about as hard as I can go, just to really make the car push through the bind, just because I don't really care for slipper clutches. But to get our motor out of here, we've got a couple little 2mm screws on the left side, just right in front of the motor. And there we go. So we've got a big pinion on the 35 turn motor, and then we've got our 2 motor screws that go down here. Those are like the servo screw style. So they got a big flat head to put more surface area to press against the plastic motor plate. So that is a nice little feature there. I'm also going to drop pinion size because that will help gear down the car, and I don't necessarily want a 14 tooth, which I'm pretty sure is what that is. Motor is out, and the Fusion can now start to go in, but we need to find ourselves a pinion. You can buy one aftermarket. You can use the stock one on a Fusion if you really want. I would recommend dropping to an 11 tooth, and that's what I'm going to try and do right now, as long as I have an 11 tooth on hand. Now, putting in a Hobbywing Fusion in these cars, if you don't have the experience of driving something with a Hobbywing Fusion, if you've only experienced your Capra with the brushed 35 turn motor, this thing is going to blow your mind. Insanely controlled low speed control, a lot more torque, and man, just super smooth. They're very quiet, And then on top of that, you can set your drag brake to 100%. So if you're on a steep hill, the car will just lock its tires and sit there on an angle. So it's really awesome. I cannot suggest that enough. I really like the Fusion Pro, especially in the Capra where there's limited space inside the cage, where having an extra ESC with motor wires and then your wires going off to your receiver, it really just helps clean it up in there, and you don't have to find a place to put an ESC in your cage, which there's not that many options. But yeah, Hobbywing Quick Run Fusion Pro, cannot recommend them enough. They're 150 bucks, and it's your ESC and your motor combined. So other systems, you're gonna have to buy your motor and your ESC most likely separate, and that can add up to more than what this Fusion Pro is. And for this car, this is my absolute favorite motor recommendation on the Capras. All right, additional information to know. If you're buying a pinion gear and they ask the question, this is a 32 pitch pinion gear. Most Axial stuff is 32 pitch. All modern Axial stuff is 32 pitch. There are different styles of gear pitches is what they call them. There's 48 pitch. That's gonna be what Element uses. And Axial uses 32 generally. And then there's also a gear pitch called Mod 1, which is a larger gear than this. You don't want Mod 1, you don't want 48 pitch, you want 32 pitch. Additionally, this is an 11-tooth pinion, which I was pretty sure I had, yay me. The second point is that the 11-tooth pinion is as small as you can go without modifying your motor plate here. You can get a Dremel out, get happy, and start cutting away and make your motor able to slide closer to your transmission. But all in all, it's just easiest if you stick with an 11-tooth. It's as small as you can go with the stock system, and you don't have to cut anything else up. All right, so now it's time to get our Fusion Pro, and it's running into our rear inside link mount. This is a double shear link mount, so I like to run my links at the lowest position anyway. So we're gonna go ahead and keep our link position there. It does the same thing as raising the link on the axle side of things is lowering the link on the skid plate side of things. So it's like a link riser in a sense. So our adjustability there, that's where we're trying to go. So we can see that the motor is trying to bump into that a good amount. So what we just need to do is take this guy. You can also take a really sharp knife. You can also take a cutting wheel and just start buzzing into this. And it's just gonna be a rinse, wash, repeat method where you cut into it, you try and drop the transmission in, and then you just edge up onto it to where it just barely fits down in there, and you keep as much material around as possible. So let's grab our Dremel and let's get to work. Well guys, I was a little more aggressive with it, doing it for this video, and truthfully, it made it easier. In the past, I had done sand a little bit and then test fit it and sand, and just do that over and over. I took like 3 passes at this and now I'm done. So yeah, it all just snaps right into place. It does just barely touch on the back side of that motor, no big deal. And we should be able to bolt this transmission right in there without any issues. So, it may come in contact just a little bit with that can. I'm not worried about that. The transmission can sit all the way down for the most part. It's good to go. That's how you make a Fusion Pro fit in your Capra. I've never had any issues with strength issues coming off of this link at this point. This is good to go, and we're ready to reinstall our transmission. Now, as far as a servo swap on these are concerned, these are about as basic as it gets, just due to the fact they're servo on axle. So we're going to remove our drag link from the servo horn. We can leave the servo horn on it. We're not reusing that. And then you just pull the 4 servo screws out of it. Rear servo's out. You can keep this for a shift servo or something that you may need it for later on down the road. It's not bad to have a backup, but this isn't anything special, so not too worried about these guys. Now we're going to drop in our Reefs 1100. And before we ever put our servo horn on it, we're going to get power to the servo and center it. Definitely have learned to do that over the times of installing servos. And having the cage off, it makes it easier to access stuff, but it's definitely not necessary to swap your servo around. All right guys, so we got our servos in, we got our servo horns installed. I put a Reefs servo shield on the rear of the truck. This is actually the back end of the truck. And then we got our front servo in, we got our wires zip tied to our upper links to route the wires a little more cleanly, kind of tuck them away a little bit. So our servo box is going to sit right in front of our rear servo here, and then they should be able to just reach into there. So everything's looking good. Got our new receiver for our Flysky GT5 controller. This is going to go inside of the fuel cell in the cage of the Capra. We've got our Fusion Pro in here. We zip tied our excessive wire on there. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to shorten this power button. It technically is possible. I have yet to actually do it. I usually double side tape this to the side of the fuel cell. It's just an easy way to power the car on and off. And of course we got our channel 2 input right here for the ESC. That will go into the receiver box as well. So everything's looking nice and clean. This wire right here is going to run forward to our battery tray. So I'm going to kind of take care of that, get the wires routed. It's not going to make great video, so you guys will see it sitting as a Capra cage vehicle again. But we're just going to leave our dig locked in four-wheel drive. The dig does exist in this transmission. Basically, Axial has a little 3mm spacer that goes over the shaft that stops the shifting mechanism from being able to move, so it locks it forward. So the car's locked in four-wheel drive. We're not going to add an additional servo. If you want to add dig, you can. I am not going to do it for this car at this moment. All right, guys, we have made some awesome progress on this build so far. I couldn't take it any longer. Having the BFGs on here, we had to cover up the Nitto graphic on the hood, and so we covered that up with some Proline stickers. Shout out Proline. Now we're going to do a free mod. Everybody should do this. This is absolutely something you should do to your Capra, and that is remove the bottom spring cups from these stock shocks if you're going to continue to use the stock shocks. The spring will then just go all the way down and ride on the spring perch for the axle, or I should say the double shear mount for the shock. But it's going to turn this thing from a monster truck into a much more appropriate ride height, but you still maintain the full articulation of the truck. You haven't modified the full travel of the suspension in any way. So there, once we settle it in a little bit, now she looks much better. And I'm going to put in a before and after picture real quick so you guys can see just how it settles the truck down, gets those links much more leveled out. This is how a real portal car should sit. Now, although we've added 2 Smart 1100 servos from Reefs, we're not done adding Reefs servo to this Capra. I've got a Reefs 99 micro winch that we're going to install using the WDW micro servo winch mount for the Capra. This one is in a completely raw finish. This is one of about 8 that I did not send off to anodize, and so that's one of my own personal collection there, and that's just a one-off mount that aren't even available. We're going to stuff that in the nose of this car. We're going to get that micro winch in there. That's also going to be able to be used as a suck-down winch, which I did install the suck-down winch bracket behind the servo, which acted as a nice spacer to get this servo horn just in front of the pumpkin right here. It was just barely rubbing, and with my bracket behind it, it clears by just, I mean, a couple thousandths of an inch, truthfully. So real happy with the way that worked out, and we're gonna get this winch tucked in the nose of this four-wheel steer Capra. There's a cross member in the chassis just below the battery tray, right behind the front shock here. You're going to remove the 2 screws that hold that in, and the servo mount is going to replace that as the cross member. And instead of being plastic, it is 6061 T6 aluminum, so it's going to be much stronger in there and actually increase your chassis rigidity in the nose of the car. So this is that little plastic piece that came out of the nose of the car. Again, that just sits up in there in that orientation. We're going to remove that, and then this guy is going to snap into place where this was. So with both my winch mount and my 3-link kit for Axial Capra cages, they are specific to the cages and both work with the drag axle version and the four-wheel steer version. All right, guys, we have made it to the end. This is our final form for this Capra. Let's go over one more time all the things we changed. Wheels and tires. If you're building your own, you certainly don't have to go this route, but just pick a better tire than what Axial sent, as well as an insert. You could keep the plastic bead locks if you really want to save some money, but a good quality tire. My suggestions to people is choose a Proline tire, choose the tread pattern you want, and get it in G8. Pretty much they all do very well. The tread pattern doesn't change all that much, but the compound is what's very important. So I really like the G8 compound, and in these crawlers, when they start breaking off the leading edges, the traction just goes up and up from there. So they're good to start, and then they get even better as you crawl with them. I've got the SL3D RC Squid'n'serts in there. They're fantastic. They stop the car, stop the sidewalls from rolling over on themselves if I'm on a side hill. So big fan of those. The Vision RC 2.2s, tons of clearance on the backside, very nice machining. They look great. Thank you again, Vision. and then the rest of it. So we did electronic suite. So we did Reefs Smart 1100s front and rear. We did Vanquish servo horns. These are the breast cancer awareness ones. We did a Reefs RC99 micro servo winch with the WDW micro servo winch mount for the Capras. I've got it set up as a suspension suck down winch so that we can control the droop on the front of the nose. Another great way to do that is D's Company D's bands. I just don't have any to go with this car at the moment. They will end up on this Capra at some point. The D's bands are fantastic on the front of the Capra. I'm a huge fan of those, so definitely look into that. Outside of that, we got Brass Knuckles in the front. We got Overdrive in the front. This thing is ready to rip. We got the Hobbywing Fusion set up in here. We did a Flysky GT5 receiver. So let's fire this thing up, do a functions check. We'll catch you guys in the next video when we get it out on the rocks. Certainly excited to do so. With the winch being there, you can't run the big fat 4300s through there easily, but you can stuff a 1300 3S in there, no problem. This thing's sensor wire is getting in my way a little bit. So we got our power button double side taped to the side of the fuel cell back here. Nice and easy to find. Fire up our controller. There she is. Rear steer independent on this knob here so that I can control it as I drive. So this is how I drive my cars. Throttle here, which we need to reverse, and then our steering with our thumb, and then I control the rear steer with this. And then as I'm doing that, I will hold the GoPro handle right here in my hand. So I'm doing this and pinching the rears and driving around. Let's reverse that throttle real quick. Just that easy. Now the car's going the correct direction. We're gonna set our endpoints for our steering. But look at this thing go. It's already getting traction, ready to rip, ready to rock and roll. Already rolled it over and we haven't even left the bench. And of course, can't forget that last mod where we just removed the bottom of the spring retainers off the shocks. I'm a huge fan of that. It's free, try it out. If you don't like it, you can put them back on. No problem there, no permanent mods. So I really appreciate you guys watching this. These are my favorite upgrades to the Axial Capra. This is a fantastic start to anybody's project. And it doesn't have to be these exact parts. It doesn't have to be those exact brass knuckles, but I do think that forward weight in the Capra benefits all the Capras. It doesn't have to be that much overdrive, but I do think overdrive benefits all the Capras. It doesn't have to be these tires, but you gotta get good tires to put the traction down. And you know, a good Fusion Pro is a fantastic brushless system. It's compact. It's really like my most recommended for a Capra specifically. But if you wanna do something cool like an Outrunner and a small ESC, that's a great choice to go with as well. So, I am very excited to get this guy out on the rocks. Hope you guys are too. We will catch you in the next video where we take this out. I will create a playlist for this as well, so you can go to my channel. I have a lot of playlists of many different types of trucks, brands, the Capra videos, as well as this specific Capra. So be sure to check out my playlists on my West Desert Wheeler YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. We will see you guys on the next one. Keep the rubber side down.